Jane, welcome to the podcast.
Well, Dave, it's wonderful to be with you.
This is I was so excited for this. Um, so I think I've told you this before, Jane. You were my all-time favorite boss and my least favorite boss, sometimes in the same day.
And probably sometimes within 10 minutes of each other, right?
Perhaps, but you're the only boss I ever had twice. So I had left, I was gone a couple years, and then I was in a spot where I needed some contract work. This was before Uber, so I couldn't just go start driving my car around. And you all were gracious enough to have me come back, and it was wonderful. But I just want to thank you for all the opportunities you've given me, all that you've taught me. I learned so much about business, communication, ethics, client service. That served me the rest of my career. So thank you, Jane.
Well, Dave, when you came back the second time, I was like, our ship has come in. Dave Spray is back for more punishment, more reward. And I just feel really honored that our paths have crossed because you
Sure.
could have been you were a great recruiter, could have and still could, Dave. You're the best.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. So yeah, I enjoyed a lot of my time at the firm. So where are you calling in from today?
I am in our Houston office today.
Okay.
As you know, we have offices in California, New York, and DC, but I will work out of Houston until it gets too impossibly hot to work out of Houston, as you know, and we'll head west in
Excellent.
June.
Well, that sounds great. Now, are you a native Houstonian? Are you one of those rare people born here that lives here?
No, what's the saying? I got here as soon as I could, but I
Yeah.
am from Birmingham, Alabama, and
Okay.
went to college in Memphis, Tennessee, and my roommate from college was a Houstonian. And
Oh, really?
back in the day, the Galleria had just been built, and Houston was just this huge boom town. And
Yeah.
I was glad to come here back in the infancy almost.
Wow. And what did you do for work when you got here?
I worked as are your listeners mainly in Houston or are they scattered all over?
They're all over the country.
Yeah. Well, I worked for the largest bank in Houston, and I was a commercial lending officer and attended law school at night. And
Yep.
then the story goes, I practiced law, and I left Houston and went to California and practiced law, and then came back. So, kind of roads lead back to Houston ultimately.
Okay. And then what? Did you just like have a dream or a vision or something that you needed to leave the law business and get into executive search? What prompted that?
Well, a lot of practicing law, as I'm sure your listeners know, a lot of it is very compliance oriented, very
Mhm.
regulatory oriented, and I'm not a regulatory kind of person. And I had gone from being a commercial loan officer, where my job was to deal with people all day, to being stuck in a law library reading compliance regulations. I was like,
Sure.
oh my goodness, this is not good. This is not my personality. And read an article in Fortune magazine about
Okay.
Korn Ferry, the largest executive search firm in the world. And it was like the proverbial bolt of lightning went off, Dave. And I was, oh my gosh, I would be fabulous at this. I need to go work for Korn Ferry. And they had an opening back in Houston. So I left the practice of law in California and joined Korn Ferry in Houston.
Wow. And I'm guessing that you were one of many women at the firm, I'm sure, right? This was the 80s executive
Well,
search.
let's see. There were 200 partners and 2 women, and
Wow.
the minorities were all in the Hong Kong office.
Okay.
I mean, diversity was achieved, but there were like 6 men in the Hong Kong office. And that is not a knock on Korn Ferry, that the executive search business was, oh, we want to give a CEO search to somebody we've served in the military with, or somebody that we go hunting with, or
Sure, sure.
somebody on our bowling, that kind of thing. And
Yeah.
and women just weren't in that place then. So it was definitely an early time and a good time to get into executive search. In retrospect, at the time, it seemed a little challenging.
And so how did it go? Was it all you hoped it would be?
The minute I started recruiting, I was happy. I knew I
Yeah,
had found my calling. Before I got into search, I had always been one of the people that said, I'd love to introduce you to this person. I'd love to
sure.
fix you up with this person. And so I finally got in a position that you got paid for it, which is great. And I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Korn Ferry, and it's spelled
Mhm.
Kornferry, founded by 2 partners from KPMG who wanted to do recruiting of C-suite positions for their KPMG clients, and KPMG wouldn't let them do it, so they formed Korn Ferry. And so I was lucky. It was kind of the early days of Korn Ferry. They were maybe 15 years old by the time I joined them,
Wow.
and global. So it was a really great move to learn the search business.
You weren't there too long, right? Before you felt the need to unfurl your own wings.
Uh, yes, that is true. I was kind of like, wow, there there are not many women partners here, and I know I'm good at this, and I know I can be successful at this. So Dave, I hooked up with another woman at Korn Ferry, and the other big search firm is Russell Reynolds.
Yeah.
And we were like, well, let's start our own search firm. And I don't know that I would have done it by myself, but we started, really got going in 1984, which is
Okay.
40 years ago now. I feel like I'm the oldest living person alive still doing it, but uh, we started, and back then, you didn't have the internet to do research.
Sure.
Um, and our first client was Grant Thornton, the public
Okay.
accounting firm, and the number 2 person at Grant met us, and we went walking in their offices, and there were no women audit partners then, or tax partners. And we went strolling in, and he goes, well, I believe in you all, and I want you to help me build the firm. I'm going to do acquisitions, I'm going to do partner searches, I'm going to do campus recruiting. And we rode along for over 50 searches and practice acquisitions in our first years, which made it really a great foundation upon which to build.
Oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. And that's been 40 years ago.
Yeah, Dave, I probably tried to recruit you back in the days you were at Arthur Anderson. You were probably one of my recruits, even not knowing it.
Yeah, you never know. You never know. And is that when you started the billing by the hour approach, or did that come
Yes.
later? Did
We
you do that from the beginning?
we started because, having been with a law firm where you're basically
Yeah.
selling your time, we thought, well, we're going to be a different kind of search firm. We're going to bill by the hour. And it proved to be a great thing. And Dave, we were so cheap that people would go, you'll take over all our campus recruiting for $50 an hour? And we were like, yeah, yeah. And they would go, oh, great. Well, here's 10 colleges. We don't want to go. You guys go just do our recruiting for us. But Yeah, so we stayed with the billing by the hour for probably 10, 12, 13 years, which, made it challenging because, not everybody wants to fill out timesheets to the 10th
Yeah.
of an hour, which we were,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, but I remembered when we would talk to potential clients, that was part of the pitch and the fact that we could do à la carte search for them. If they
Right.
just wanted us to source candidates, we would just do that. And the other thing I loved was the independence that gave, because I know there were times that late in the search, we had three finalists and they would say, hey, we identified somebody on our own. Can we throw them into the mix? And of course, we were very receptive because we were just paid by the hour, like we didn't care.
We didn't
Whereas I
care.
think a lot of other firms, especially if there was a success fee component,
Mhm.
would be very, resistant to that. So I always thought that was great. What caused you to move away from that? Just the cumbersomeness of it, or
Yeah,
just the greater tendency to do
the
fixed fee?
cumbersomeness, but we started out doing lower level positions. And
Mhm.
as we built our reputation, we were frankly we were leaving, we weren't great timekeepers. And we kind of thought, well, let's still provide a win-win for our clients, because the big search firms, you are obligated to pay the fee. Even if they find their own candidate, you're obligated to pay the fee. So what we decided was we will do a fixed fee. We will tell the client at the beginning of the search, this is what your fee is. So it's not really tied to the compensation, but the complexity of the search. So, for example, if we were doing a search in Fargo, North Dakota in December, that might be a harder search, with that paid in the bottom 10% of compensation ranges.
Sure.
That might be a harder search than doing a search in December in Florida, for example, or,
Yeah.
with the top. So we just pivoted. I think it was in 2001 that we'll give you a fixed fee for the search, but it will be less usually than a third of total comp. So
Okay.
you're even if you put your own candidate into the process, you're still paying for it, but you're paying for a process, not a candidate. So
Gotcha.
um, we still had a competitive advantage, and it's interesting. Here we are today in 2024, and some of the other search firms are now doing what we do. Some of our biggest competitors are going,
Really?
well, we'll give you a fixed fee if the Alexander Group's giving you a fixed fee. So it's interesting how it's turned out.
But you were a disruptor in a number of ways in the search industry.
Yeah, I mean, it didn't seem like it at the time, but now that I see other firms doing the same thing to try and compete effectively, they don't want to. They'd rather just get a third. But one of the things we tell our clients when they retain us is, for your budgeting purposes, you're going to know how much the fee is, and we'll have no reason to present the most expensive candidates because our fee is already in your
Right.
budget. And we're just going to be on your side of the table trying to find the best person at the most cost effective salary compensation package. So I think it's a win-win, and it's something that has worked for the clients. And the thing that, and I know you know this, we said it when you were there and we still say it, 85% of our business every year is the same people.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
and we're really proud of that, because most search firms, their repeat business is 60%. And why is that? And, we laugh and say, well, we have an unstable product, and, there's so many things that can go wrong when you're dealing with people, but
Sure.
we try and provide very, uh, I want to say a really strong relationship focus. I mean, I tell clients, I don't want to just see you one time. We want a long-term relationship with you. And that's really important to us. And I think it makes a difference. And I think the clients feel like we really care about being part of their team. And that's really important
Mhm.
to us.
Yeah, that's great. And I did experience that. And life's just more fun when you have happy repeat customers and clients instead of people you try to squeeze for every last dollar
Yeah.
for the
And
one-time transaction.
And you're kinda like, "Well, I hope we don't have to see each other again," right? It's like, no, we wanna be around for the long haul, and, and I know you know this because, but, our first client from Grant Thornton, who's now 88 years old, is still a friend and a client and a mentor of the firm, and, I mean, we wouldn't really have it any other way. That means a lot to us.
You know, one of the most valuable lessons you taught me was when I went into your office after I'd worked there about a year and a half, when I just said, Jane, I don't think this is for me. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but I just want to set expectations. And you said, hey, as long as you continue to do good work, you can stay, as long as you want, right? I mean, just keep doing good work. And then the other thing you told me, do you remember what you told me? You said, and it was
Oh,
it was good advice, but it was also clever on your end too. What did you tell me?
I told you, no one will remember the job that you did, but everyone will remember how you leave.
Yep, yep, that's so true. And it's such simple advice, right? Because you work someplace for years, and then all you really have to do to even make up for mistakes you made is just end on a really high note, right? You could have been a average employee, but just end on a high note, and they'll all say, "Oh yeah, that
He was
Jane,
great.
she was great. She was great. We
Yeah.
loved having her around."
No, I remember that because I mean, I tell people I was not the best lawyer in the world, but I left like, how do I transition my clients? How do I help train the new person? Can I be available after I'm gone? If I need to come in on a
Mhm.
Saturday to help out, and I tell people when I make speeches, no one will, you could be really bad at your job, but if you can be a great departing employee if you aren't a current employee.
Yeah,
And that is just so true. And you will, and today, and you never know when you're going to need a reference. And in
yeah,
today, with everything so transparent, even if you don't give somebody as a reference, people will look on LinkedIn and say, "Oh, well, I'm going to call this person and see how Betty
yeah.
was as an employee." So you're going to be found out good or bad. So you might as well be the best ex-employee you can possibly be.
I love it. Yeah, no, one of the things we did when I was with the team was we would do reference checks, and I think we would oftentimes do them even before the offer was extended. I forget. I think we did it both ways. Sometimes we did it subject to reference check, sometimes we did the references first. And I was always surprised every so often you'd find out people, lied on their resume or exaggerated. But I imagine with social media and such, that's probably all gone away, right? Nobody tries to get away with that anymore, I suppose, do
You
they?
Dave, it's really interesting. Somebody asked me the other day, what surprises you the most that happens today that happened 20 years ago? And the answer is exactly as you say. People still try and fudge. They'll say, well, I received an MBA when they did the coursework, but didn't write the final paper. Or they'll be
Wow.
6 credits short of a college degree. Just last month, we weren't at the final stages, but we try and check educational background. And someone had on their resume, they had on their LinkedIn, received a bachelor's degree. And we check and there's no bachelor's degree. And they say, oh, well, but I was only 4 hours short. And I go, but 4 hours short is not, does not a degree make? And, I'm always surprised that, and people will have maybe a year gap where they're unemployed. And it's okay with COVID and all the changes that we have all gone through as a country, as a business community. It's okay that you have gaps, but it's not okay to misrepresent the gaps. And sometimes you'll have people go, oh, well, it was during COVID. I'll just kind of fudge it a little bit. And you're always going to be found out almost every single time. And I'm always surprised that people still do it though. But even at the highest levels, Dave, they still do it.
Even like at the C-suite level, you mean?
Yeah, at the
Wow.
C-suite
Wow.
level. I wrote an article as a commentator for MSNBC 10 years ago because the CEO of, I think, HP said he had a degree in computer science, but it was a degree in history, which is a pretty big difference. And I wrote an article saying, and this was even before the proliferation of social media 10 years ago.
Mhm.
And I said, you will be found out. This guy did, and it was very public. And he got fired from HP. It was
Sure.
a big deal. And I was like, do not let it stand. If you fudged, go fix it, fess up.
Yeah. Well, the
And
irony was, if he was, at that level, he probably had graduated at least 25 years earlier.
yeah,
So the irony was his degree had nothing to
who
do with his
cares?
current level. Yeah,
Yeah,
nobody cared except that he lied about it.
he
Because
lied
if
about that.
somebody lies about something that can be checked, what are they lying about that can't be checked, right?
Exactly. Well, and the other thing is when you think about somebody's personal branding, wouldn't it
Mhm.
make a great story? Hey guys, I don't know. I had a history degree and look how good I am. I'm running HP now and I've had to
Right,
learn
right.
software. But to say he had a computer science degree, I mean, it made no sense. But people do that still. And I always tell people a lot, I know some of your listeners are small businesses where they don't have huge departments, but one of the most important things you can do is do background checks and reference checks, unofficial and official, because people is they never will stop doing it. And no matter how many commentators tell them don't do it, they do it.
That Well, I guess it's time for me to go update my LinkedIn. For all these years, Jane, I've been telling the world that I was the CEO of the Alexander Group and you worked for me. So I think I'd better go fix
You
that before it
better
backfires
go
on me.
fix it. Well, people always say, "How did you get the name the Alexander Group?" And we truly, the name Alexander kind of has a masculine kind of connotation.
Yeah.
And even when you were with us, Dave, we would get calls once a week going, Mr. Alexander, please. Yeah. And
Right.
I think I think not only did you say you were CEO, I think your name, you've been passing off your name is David Alexander, right?
That could very well be. And I learned so much about presentation because, when I was there, a lot of the recruiters were young, fresh out of college. And, you and John did a great job of mentoring these folks and developing them. But it was always so interesting that, we had a pretty casual environment. And back then, you would leave a message for a candidate and they would call back the main switchboard. I don't think we even had direct dial numbers back then. And
No.
they'd call back, and here's this scruffy 23-year-old unshaven guy wearing, Birkenstocks to work named, Tom, let's say, and when the person would call back and they'd say, yeah, Tom Smith, please. You train the receptionist to say, oh, hold on, may I ask Mr. Smith, who's calling?
And
Just to, I mean, there's no harm in saying Mr. Smith, because that is his name. But why say, oh yeah, let me see if Tommy Boy's, done having his afternoon tequila shot, right? I mean, there's no use in
no,
to
it was all about the, because we were so small and scruffy, we
right,
were trying to make, and the other thing we would do would be, to say, I'd train the receptionist to go, never say Mr. Smith is not at his desk.
right,
He
office,
is
not in
not
his
in
office.
his office, and I will have one of his assistants call you back.
Nice. One of, I like that.
I know. I mean, I just am blushing thinking about what we did to make ourselves sound substantial. And there's Tommy Smith back in the back office, sound asleep at his desk, Uh,
Exactly.
and sometimes I go, oh, well, and sometimes, candidates would call back. They say, well, why is Tommy Smith calling me? And if I happen to be at the office late at night, you and I would always be there late, and I go, oh, well, I'm just Mr. Smith. I can't. I would have no idea why he's calling you, and he may be in our San Francisco office tomorrow. Could he call you back then? Yeah, again, trying to, some of it is the smoke and mirrors of making yourself sound like
Well,
you're.
I remember when I would, like when you or John would be like traveling, I would try to book some other BD calls, right? You're interviewing folks in Kansas City. What other companies are headquartered in Kansas City, or just other things? And one of the things that the things I did that I learned a lot about this is that even though you and John were based in Houston, if I was trying to set up Houston appointments, I would act as if you and John were based in San Francisco. Like I'd say, oh, Miss Howze will be in, she'll be in Houston for 2 days next week. She won't be in the San Francisco office. She'll be in the Houston office for 2 days. Now, the reality is you were going to be there for 2 weeks, but you were going to be there for those 2 days. And it was, what's the biblical saying? You can't be a prophet in your own homeland. And I think
Exactly.
it's still
Well,
true to this day that expert from out of town, and they rearrange their schedule for the person from out of town.
there's a Buddhist saying that says the visitor from afar brings knowledge.
Mm,
And
I like that. I like that.
sometimes I get asked to talk to college students about how, or young people, about how do you find jobs? And my clients' kids want to know, how do we find a job? And I'm not a career counselor, but what I tell them is, the further, like if you went to NYU, say, you're going to have more success calling NYU alums in Houston, trying to get them to help you, than you will in New York City.
Yeah.
If you're a University of Houston graduate and you're in San Francisco, there's probably only 20 of you in the whole town, and all people are hardwired to help people who come from afar if there's a limited population. And
Mhm.
but it goes kind of with that thing of being unique. Like, how many people come from Houston to San Francisco for a meeting 20 years ago? I mean, it happened, but it wasn't every day that a head of human resources got that phone call, right?
And I still find like in my business that it's easier for me to get an appointment in Syracuse, New York, if I'm going to be up there for business anyway. It's easier to get that appointment than it is with somebody in Houston. Because in
Right.
Houston, they're just like, I'm busy this week, call me next month, because you're so available. It's just like, it seems like if you're meeting somebody for dinner, the closer the restaurant, the more likely you are to be late, or the more likely I am to be late. Because if I'm driving 30 minutes, I'm gonna allow 45 for traffic and stuff. But if it's 3 minutes away, I'm gonna leave 2 minutes before the dinner. And then
Exactly.
get a stoplight caught at, and then the parking lot's full and.
Yeah. No, it is, but it is something about the further something is away. And I remember one of the ways I built up our business, and some of our first clients, most of our first clients were California companies, because California had more, they were more used to women in doing C-suite searches. But, I was in California every 2 weeks for probably 30 years. And I would call and go, well, I'm from Houston. I'm a woman-owned search firm. I'm going to be in LA. Can I come see you? And we got a lot of great clients like Wells Fargo, Warner Brothers, a lot of McKesson Company, because they were like, oh, the visitor from afar, they're coming from Houston, and they're women in the search business. Great, and I spent a lot of time where people would go, well, I have time tomorrow morning at 11 o'clock, and oh great, I'm going to be there. And I quickly hung up the phone and called United or called Continental Airlines and started booking that airline ticket as fast as I could.
Yeah, I do remember. What are my listeners love stories. What are some stories of just interesting or amusing or candidate screw up things that come to mind where, yeah, I don't know, a candidate showed up intoxicated, or a
Yeah,
candidate
yeah.
showed up and forgot to put pants on that day. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I remember way back in the early days, one of my first big searches was a senior lending officer for a regional bank here. And the candidate was great, and I was so excited. And so um I called the CEO of the bank after the interview, and I said, Rex, how did the interview go? He goes, Jane, he didn't come. I said, he didn't come. What the hell? Why didn't he come? He said, oh, it was okay. He drove through the teller window and passed a note to the teller to pass to me that he'd changed his mind. And you just go, who drives through wouldn't go in for the interview, but drives through and says, will you give this handwritten note on a scrap of paper? I'm not coming. And so that was kind of the early days. Um, a second story, and I mean, it's crazy what we did back in the early days, but one client wanted us to live in LA and take over all their staffing for it. This is when we were hourly billing and we were pretty cheap. And they said, yeah, we'll get you a room at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown LA. We want you there for a month. And we're trying to figure out how to save money, because back then, we just wanted to be. And so we bought Dave a $700 car, so we wouldn't have rental car charges. And we called it the Gray Ghost. It was a Delta 88
Oh,
Oldsmobile,
yeah, the gray goat.
and we drove this car. And I am embarrassed to tell you, and I hope your listeners will think we were really creative rather than really, really cheesy. But when we were done with the car, when we finished the search, and the client actually is still a client in other iterations, we just left the car at a Fridays at Marina Del Rey, and that was it, because it was on its last legs, and that was it. We just left the keys in the car, and that was it. Um,
That's you reminded me of something. A good friend of mine owes you his job. because you just reminded me of something, and I know I learned this from you. So this really good friend of mine, CPA, but classic stereotypical CPA, introverted, not very outgoing, but very technically sound. And he was working at a public accounting firm, and he was kind of stuck at the senior level. He couldn't get promoted to manager, which usually happens after like 5 years. And there's a firm in town that I knew a guy there, and they were looking for like a first year audit manager. So he was perfect for it. And so the three of us met for a drink at Papa Do's on Westheimer over in the Galleria. But I told him ahead of time, I said, Pete, he is, I'm just going to tell you right now, he's not Mr. Personality. If you're looking for a glad handing, outgoing salesman type, he's not the right guy for you. And so, of course, what did he say? No, we're not looking for a salesman. We're looking for a manager, right? Somebody technically solid. So we met, and afterwards, we had a good time. And afterwards, I said, so what'd you think? And he said, I'm glad you told me that he wasn't Mr. Personality, because I was kind of prepared for it. And he did the same thing when they met with the people at the firm. He told them on the front end, hey, this guy's not Mr. Personality, but he's really smart. I think he can do the job. And 30 years later, he's a senior partner at this Houston CPA firm. And I know I learned that line from you. Now, let me just tell you, this person's not Mr. Personality. Does that sound like something you might have said for?
Yeah. Well, you know what? I mean, part of what I look at a recruiter's job, an executive search person's job is you tell the client what's wrong or what's missing because they're smart and they're going to get it themselves. And if you tell them you are adding value, you're being a
Yeah.
consultant, and you've managed expectations. So when we do a search, we write a paper, basically a report. These are the things that might not exactly fit, but these are the things that overcome what you are looking for. And which reminds me of one more story. I remember doing a audit partner search for, I think it was Grant Thornton up in St. Louis, and no, it was in Chicago actually. And so as you recall, we would fly to the cities, park
Yeah.
ourselves at a hotel restaurant, and just sit there and make that our office. It was pre-Zoom. And so I got to O'Hare sitting down, and my 3 o'clock appointment comes up at 1 o'clock, and I go, buddy, you're here a little bit early. He said, oh yeah, I've heard great things about the Alexander Group, and I'm just going to sit at this next table and watch you in action. And I'm like, well, buddy, that's just not going to. And mentally, I'm thinking, well, buddy is no longer a candidate. But he wanted to sit and listen in on every other interview so he could get some good tips of how to interview himself. And anyway,
Not a bad idea if he had just simply kept that information to himself,
right.
right? Like if he had figured out.
And not done it when I'd already started the interview. So I mean, I kind of lost two candidates right in one setting. You
Wow,
can't make this stuff up.
that is something. Hey, I've got a question somewhat related to search. Some of this conversation's about executive search, right? We
Yeah.
probably should have at least maybe a third of it about search. What about board members? So, I've got clients who, sold $50 million revenue, successful privately held companies. And they maybe think, yeah, I might like to serve on a board. Now, for somebody to be on a public company board, do they need public company experience?
Dave, I think the question, as I'm kind of rounding third base in my career, and a lot of my peers are in their 60s and they've sold their private company, they've
Mhm.
retired from a public company, they've, for whatever reason, they say, well, I'm going to retire. I want to be on a board. Can I get on a board? My answer is always this: yes. However, it's a question of how much time do you want to spend to get on your first board. Once
Okay.
you get on one board, even if you're a private company executive, can you get on a public board? Yes. Asterisk, if you're willing to really work hard on at that. The average board tenure is 10 years. Board positions don't really turn over that much of a healthy company. So people get on a board, and especially if it's a public board, there's incentive comp, there's options. It's not a hard gig for a lot of companies. So the answer is yes. And then what do you do if you want to get on a board? Probably 70% of all board positions are not gotten through search firms. Does
Okay.
that surprise you?
Maybe, yeah, maybe some. It's the network, huh? The network of the other
Network,
board
because,
members and
yeah,
the CEO.
yeah, because people will say, oh, well, I know somebody, I'll go back to my UT alum group and see if they're, kind of knows around there, or I'll see if, oh, I know a guy that works at Goldman Sachs. Maybe he knows somebody. I know a friend that's part retiring from Ernst and Young, and I'll ask her. And so there's a lot of, with the call for diversity, search firms are becoming more involved, but and doing more. And 30% is still a lot to be putting out to search. But so the things that, if any of your listeners are interested, I tell people, do a board resume.
Okay.
And a board resume is different than a job resume. It's talking about your experience assessing risk, building a company, governance, compliance, um, things that a board member would look at. And the board member's not looking at the details of, do you get 2 weeks or 3 weeks for vacation? They're looking at what's our strategic plan,
Hmm.
being the boss of the CEO, representing shareholders. So you want a one-page board resume that talks about what you've done that would be analogous to that. And then you really want to get on a not-for-profit board. Helps, because especially if it's big enough, there will be other corporate people there and you will make contacts. But it's really about making contacts. A lot of investment banks, they don't use search firms. When they take a company public, they have databases. They go through their contacts. Um, Bankers know people, it's all about the three sources. I would say, if any of your listeners are saying, I want to be on a board one day, do you know anybody in investment banking, private equity, public accounting, M&A law firms, anybody like that? And tell everybody you're looking for those recommendations. And then the last thing is, a lot of your listeners are successful people who've had roles in companies that are entrepreneurial in nature. And a lot of them, I know people that have taught an entrepreneurship class or a lecturer at Rice University here. And there's a lot of smart kids who are starting businesses. Let's not forget Google,
Yeah.
Facebook, some of these companies that started from college kids. And I think that's a great avenue to think about if you're thinking about ways to get on a board.
I like it. That is really helpful. Well, speaking of rounding third base, I can't believe how the time has flown by. I have just a couple other questions for you. One is, I've heard about this great resignation. What has been your experience? Has this trickled up to the C-suite and the board level? Or is this a problem that those people are having to deal with people lower in the organization? Tell me about the great resignation from your perspective.
Well, one thing hasn't changed. If you look at CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that are recruited from the outside, I would say they have a 50% chance of being there 2 to 3 years out. And why is that? Culture fit. So the top, you will always have CEO changes if they don't, especially if they come from outside and they don't fit with the culture. What I think we are seeing and we see from our clients is post-COVID, there's been so many obvious changes, but a lot of things that aren't obvious. People don't want to relocate as much as they might have pre-COVID. Why is that? Well, COVID scared people in terms of my parents. I've got to take care of my parents. I may have to have my kids at home for high school. And do I want to go to someplace new and have something like that happen? So I think you're having that we're coming out of, but you're also having middle range employees who aren't as loyal.
Yeah.
And I always tease that a lot of the younger people today, if they have a bad Monday, they may be someplace else by Friday, It's so I think there's not quite that stickiness of what you grew up with and I grew up with of, hey, we want to, we don't want to be a quote job hopper. And I think people today don't care if they're job hoppers quite as much. And there's not that people are more willing, I think in COVID accentuated that where they're more willing to take risk. And, maybe I'll be without a job for a month, 2 months. And I think we're seeing that. And what I tell small businesses that, be focusing on how do you make a culture that will keep people invested long term? And there've been a lot written on that, and it's different for every company, depending on where your location is and what your employee mix. But I think that's a really important thing that everybody's got to do in a bigger way. And also, lastly, Dave, the emphasis on mental health is something that has changed dramatically in the last 3 years, where, we've got to take care of people financially, and also how are they doing? Because so many people were isolated during COVID and had mental health issues, and people talk about that more, which we never did back in the day. You just bucked it up and, kept making those source calls, Dave,
Because for every 6 you made, you got to check off 1/10 of an hour of work.
Exactly. You had
Or
to
something
make
to that
say
effect.
left message with 10 people to get that six.
I had it backwards. It was even harder than I remembered. That's why you get so excited if somebody answered the phone, because even if you only talk 30 seconds, you got to put them down as a
Yeah, no, that's right. They'd go, no,
conversation.
I'm not interested. And you go, that's okay.
Awesome.
I'm 10 minutes ahead here.
That is great. So I think so 2 questions left. So one is there anything that I did not ask you that you wish I had? Or is there anything we did not talk about that you think we should have?
No, you're a really good interviewer, Dave, which I knew.
Well, I learned it from you. I learned it.
I
Starts with interviewing candidates and it translates to other things.
No, Well, I'm really honored to be here, Dave, because the people that you serve and that you do work for, I think it is much harder to run a smaller private company than it is a big company because you've got to have employees who are multifaceted. You've got to have employees who have an entrepreneurial mindset. So my hat is off to the work you do, the clients that you serve, because it is a hard business.
Well, I appreciate that. I love serving entrepreneurs. That is for sure. So here's the last question. This is a curveball one. You may remember when you asked if you needed to do any preparation. I said, no, we're just going to talk about your life story and you don't need any prep. But I promise you one curveball, and here it is. Are you ready? If you could go back in time and give advice to your 25 or 28-year-old self, what advice might you give yourself?
Oh, that is a great question. Don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff.
Okay.
And the things that you worry about 90% of them do not materialize.
Was it Mark Twain or Will Rogers? I always get their two quotes conflated, but one of them said, I'm an old man, and in my life I've known a great many difficulties, most of which never came to pass, or something
Yes,
to that effect.
yes, that's right. And Mark Twain, as you will recall from our time together, said, I didn't have time to write a short story, so I wrote a long story, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that I learned a lot about concise writing, and just I'm always amazed at people that just the simplest stuff that I never picked up in English class, like, but Bob is a person who does XYZ. It's not Bob that does something. It's Bob's not a that, he's a who.
He's a who. That's right. And word choice but I sound like a geezer, but stuff like that is, I mean, a lot of people today really don't know that. I
Sure.
mean, even, I see at the executive ranks a lot of people who just and I think one of the things when I talk to people early in their career is learn to write, learn business writing out there. I mean, especially now with Zoom, and you can do business with people by email. A lot of
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
and if I get a resume from somebody that um uh, doesn't spell check or
Right.
anything else. Dave, one final story, and it's so
Yeah.
good, and it reminds me, it doesn't remind me of you for obvious reasons, but I don't know if you remember that we sent a letter out one time when you joined, maybe when you rejoined us, and we said Dave is from, Arthur Anderson, a leading public accounting firm, but we left out the L of public. Do you remember that?
I remember, I that does sound familiar. The other
And I,
thing I
I
remember,
remember somebody saying, well, I don't know what it is, but we want some, right?
oh, that's funny because yeah, when you send out as much written correspondence as the firm has for so long, it can't try as you might, it can't all be perfect. Just like I'm amazed when I read like a best-selling book that sold 20 million copies and you find a typo. You're like, but when I talked to an author about that, they said, yeah, there's 100,000 words in here. Like you just sometimes they slip through the cracks.
Well, Dave, the thing I remember about you, and I always feel like I can learn something from everybody, even though you're younger than I am, but even back when you were really young and with us, you were so effective at client communication and getting business. And do you remember that you are the ones that taught us that people are hardwired to want to help, but you have to give them a way to help you? And you would come up with a list. Like, do you know people from any of these 5 companies? And people would look at it and go, oh, yeah, I can help you. I do know somebody from here. And what a great way to teach someone how to develop their own clients as to teach the client how to help them, the potential client how or source how to help them.
Well, that's one of the benefits of being a bad employee who changed jobs every year. Is I was exposed to a lot of things. I learned that in the financial services business. And what made it so powerful was because in the financial services business, you're always trying to get, referrals to folks. And if you just say, hey, Jane, who do you know who's looking to buy life insurance? Probably nobody comes to mind, right?
Nobody. Yeah.
Nobody, because nobody's come up to you and said, hey, I need life insurance. Do you know anyone? But what I learned in that is still helpful today. But instead, if you give somebody a list of 10 people and you say, Jane, I'm going to be calling these 10 people next week. I'm just curious. Can you tell me, is there anyone on this list you think is particularly great or you think really highly of? And they'd say, oh, sure, let me borrow your pen. They check off 3 or 4 names. You're like, great. And then I would say, hey, by chance, if you happen to talk to them before next week, will you tell them I'm going to call them? And they, of course, would say, sure, I haven't talked to this guy I went to law school in 5 years. It's unlikely I'm going to talk to him this week, but sure, I'll tell him. Okay. And then finally, Jane, when I talked to John Lamar, is it appropriate to mention that, that we had a conversation, that he came up in conversation? Sure. Yeah, no problem. So then when I would call the person, it was so easy. Hey, John Lamar, by chance, did Jane Howze tell you I'd be calling?
Yeah.
No, how's Jane doing? I haven't seen her since law school. Boy, she's really wonderful. I like Jane. And so, yeah, you know Jane, huh? Yeah, I haven't known her a long time. I haven't known her as long as I've known you, meaning I've met her for 10 minutes. But all of my dealings with her were first rate. All of them. And then just say, hey, Jane had some nice things to say about you. And she thought we might benefit from meeting one another, when are you? And it was amazing how well but it all started with just having a list to start with. Because there's a difference between if somebody, like, let's say that conversation went poorly and John Lamar called you back and said, hey, why'd you have that Dave Spray guy call me? Well, if you can say, I didn't tell him to call you, he already had your name. He was going to call you anyway.
He was
just
going to
asked,
call you anyway. I just
jerk.
said you were a great guy. Yeah.
Right. He just wanted to know if you were a jerk or not. And apparently I was wrong because here you're giving me a hard time. All I did was say you were a nice guy and now you're giving me a hard time. But yeah.
And Dave, what I remember, the funny thing was John Lamar, my 30-year partner, he went to a meeting with you and he said, Jane, Dave pulled out the list. And I said, he pulled out the list. And he said, yes, and it worked. And we were just like, we were so nervous about the list, but Dave, it really works.
It's it is funny. And the irony is the time you pull the list out is when the meeting doesn't go well.
Yeah.
Like it's a brief meeting and they're like, no, my best man at my wedding's a partner at Corn Ferry. That's where all of our search goes. We'll never give it to anyone else. Well, now you have nothing to lose by pulling out the list. I mean, if they on the spot want to sign you up for some searches, well, just keep the list in your pocket. But and the irony was the worse the meeting goes, the more helpful they would seem to be, right? Because they kind of feel bad that you flew all the way from Houston. You flew all the way from Houston out to see them and they can't help you. So now, sure, I'll look at your list. I'll give you some.
No, but it's true. The list, Dave. I mean, that is a course in business development and we were like, God, that list is not going to work, but it works. It absolutely does.
Well, and you know, when I first used that, this shows how I approach business development. When I was in the financial services business, out of Arthur Anderson, attorneys were my best prospects. So this was like 1990. Excel hadn't even been invented. They were using Lotus 123. And I bought the Martindale Hubble legal
Mhm.
director. You remember this thing, the blue, yeah,
Yes.
or maybe it was but it was a blue thing. And what I did, that I was so proud of myself, I went through that and I created a spreadsheet, and I knew one attorney in Houston, and he was like a second year attorney at some place, and he went to U of H, and I played basketball with him, and I went and I had lunch with him, and I pulled out the graduates from like the top 20 law firms in Houston, and I had them sorted by year in college. So the first list I gave him was all of the people who graduated from law school, the ones in his start class. And then I gave him a list of all the other U of H grads who were like a couple years older to a year younger. Same thing. Who do you know? And then I made the call to them. And then Jane, it got to be so crazy. I would go to like V&E, and I would be there like, I'd have like 12 meetings in a row, like at V, and they would literally walk me from one office to the next. And they'd be like, hey, so who's next on your list? Oh, Bob. Oh, he's a hoot. Yeah, you'll enjoy meeting him. And so they would escort me into the office. It was like, it was this introduction from one stranger to another one. But then the new person I would meet with, so, you know, Lauren introduced me to a guy who started with him that went to UT. So I would have all the other UT guys, oh, at his firm and at the other firms in town. And it just exploded. Like in 3 or 4 months, I was like the guy for all the third year attorneys at Baker Botts and V&E and Fulbright. But anyway,
That is
that
so
was,
fun, but it works, Dave, and it's something, 15, 20 years later, I still remember, quote, "the list."
yeah, yeah, some great times. So Jane, thank you so much for not only inviting me to the 40th anniversary party. That was just spectacular. Seeing some of my former colleagues, that was just great. And just yeah, having the ability to be friends with you and your husband and John Lamar all these years is very special. I like to say there's only one ex-girlfriend I keep in touch with, and there's only one ex-employer I keep in touch with, and that's you
But
all.
where you are a VIP favored status, you worked for us twice, and we keep hoping that that phone will ring the third time, Dave, and it'll be the charm.
Yeah, you never know it. And I would jokingly say I did 2 tours of duty, which, doesn't really sound very complimentary to the firm, I must say. Tour of duty has a certain negativity to it in a way, conscription,
Well,
drafted.
yes, it's at least it's not like prison sentence, I mean, it's
True,
one
true.
step up. I'll give you that.
That is awesome. Well, Jane, I could talk all day to you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate everything.
Oh, my pleasure, Dave. How much fun this has been.
It has been. Have a great day.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.